Thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the main topic, we want to let you know that we are constantly seeking new cases to feature. This includes stories for our other channel, Paranormally Listed, as well as for Into the Killings podcast. We're eager to hear about strange, supernatural phenomena or mysteries that defy explanation, including any personal encounters with the supernatural you might have experienced. For Into the Killing, we're particularly interested in cold cases that eventually reached resolution. If you have a case suggestion, please visit our website at kremlinlist.com and navigate to the suggested case page. Speaking of suggestions, we'd like to offer a tip for improving your home and vehicle scents. I've always looked for products that help keep my environment smelling fresh and inviting. That's why I was pleased to discover Drift, our sponsor for today. Drift is the sister company of the popular fragrance subscription service, Scentbird, which I personally use to stay smelling great. While Scentbird offers monthly fragrance deliveries for the body, Drift specializes in making your home and car smell incredible. Drift's air fresheners are eco-friendly and crafted from natural essential and fragrance oils. They offer a variety of options for vehicles, including stone, wood, and metal fresheners. For home use, their selection includes candles, reed diffusers, and room sprays, making it a convenient one-stop shop to enhance your space's scent. I particularly enjoy their subscription service, which begins with a starter kit containing a clip and a scent. The company recommends changing scents every 30 days, and I love receiving their monthly scent of the season, often inspired by themes like seaside summers or cozy holidays. This month, for example, I received Seaside, which has a fresh, soapy aroma, reminiscent of a coastal Mediterranean town, complete with the sound of waves. You may be familiar with the concept of nasal adaptation, sometimes called nose blindness, which can dull your perception of familiar scents. Regularly switching fragrances helps combat this effect. If you prefer not to subscribe monthly, Drift's flexibility allows you to select your scents, adjust delivery frequency, or cancel at any time. Don't forget to use my coupon code CLISTED55 to get 55% off your first month. Check out Drift via the link in the description so your car and home can always smell inviting. Now, shifting to a different story, let's talk about Marco Flores. When Marco was only 3 years old, his mother left him in the care of his 14-year-old brother, Oscar, in Metapan, El Salvador. She planned to relocate to the United States and promised she would eventually send for him. 3 years later, Oscar handed Marco off to strangers who drove him northward, passing him from one set of people to another. The boy was repeatedly shuttled from person to person until he finally reached Mexico, then boarded a flight to Boston, Massachusetts. Upon returning home after an unrecognized reunion with his mother in East Boston, whom he hadn't seen in 3 years, Marco moved into her apartment. His mother was working 7 days a week, cleaning offices to make ends meet. 2 years later, Marco's older brother Oscar arrived from abroad. He also found work cleaning offices. Living down the street was 21-year-old Jamie Gandelas, a young man who quickly became part of their circle. Soon, Jamie was babysitting Marco after school, fostering a close connection. One day, Marco discovered that Gal Dames had hidden a camera in his room, secretly recording him while he was changing. When Marco turned 10, Valdemus began sexually abusing him, molestations that persisted until Marco was 13. The aftermath of this trauma manifested in panic attacks, prompting Marco to focus on physical fitness by frequenting the gym. Despite Valdemus remaining a part of the family's life, Marco distanced himself from him. By May of the following year, Marco, then 17, intended to create a video for a school project and needed a digital camera. The only person he knew with one was Phil Damas, who agreed to lend it. When Marco retrieved the camera from Damas's apartment, he noticed a photograph of his young nephew sitting on Jamie Gandelis's lap, along with other images beneath it. Though he initially laughed at the pictures, disturbing thoughts overwhelmed him. Jamie had sexually abused his nephew, and he feared other children could be at risk. Marco owned a pit bull, but his mother made him give the dog away. However, he kept the choke chain used for training. Driven by his concerns, he took the chain and the camera to Damas's home. Inside, Marco pointed the camera at Damas and started questioning him. Instantly, Marco's mind raced back. He remembered being sexually abused by Damas. In a tragic act, Marco placed the chain around Damas's neck, beginning to strangle him. Damas seemed to accept his fate, pleading for Marco not to stab him, fearing it would be too painful. In a desperate act, Marco sat in front of a mirror, strapped duct tape around his wrists and head, then pulled hard on the chain until Damas, aged 27, stopped moving. He recorded the murder, then moved Damas's body onto the bed. Splashing lighter fluid around the apartment, Marco collected the camera and computer, then laughed at the chaos he had unleashed. The next morning, he returned, tossing a lit match into the apartment through an open window, deliberately waiting for residents to evacuate before setting the building ablaze. Afterward, Marco confided in his mother and brother Oscar, who advised him to turn himself in. Ultimately, Marco went to the police, reporting the abuse he suffered and explaining that he had killed Damas because he believed he was abusing his nephew. He handed over the video camera, which contained footage of both his confession and the murder. Marco was subsequently charged with first-degree murder, facing the consequences of his tragic and complex actions. After meticulously planning and covering up his crime, Marco believed he had evaded justice. However, authorities investigating Damas's computer discovered hundreds of photographs depicting preteen boys. Among these were 50,000 lines of encrypted messages in which Damas discussed grooming and abusing children, mentioning specific youngsters he knew, including one named Marco. 2 years after the murder, in May of 2011, 16-year-old Marco Flores faced a court where he pled guilty to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge emphasized that justice would not permit vigilante actions. 4 years into his incarceration, Marco was interviewed by a Boston Globe reporter. He expressed that taking a life is never justified, but clarified he did not feel remorse for his actions. He described the victim as a truly bad individual who refused help and chose to act violently. While acknowledging some remorse, Marco admitted he did not feel sadness over the passing of his victim. Most likely, Marco Flores will be released in 2025 and expected to be deported back to El Salvador. He is currently serving time at the Souza Baranovsky Correctional Center in Shirley, Massachusetts. Turning to a different case, Fort Bragg, a small coastal city in California, was home to 31-year-old Aaron Vargas. In February of 2009, Vargas appeared to be turning over a new leaf after a turbulent period. Engaged and father to a 6-month-old daughter, he was on the verge of marriage. Yet, underlying his circumstances were years of depression, episodes of binge drinking, multiple DUI arrests, and difficulty maintaining employment. After moving away from Fort Bragg, he initially managed better, but often returned home following setbacks. Daryl McNeil, a respected community member, owned an appliance store, mentored youth through Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and served as a Boy Scout leader. On February 8, 2009, Vargas was drinking beer and vodka near McNeil's mobile home. Armed with a Civil War replica pistol, he approached McNeil's door and shot him in the stomach. McNeil's third wife rushed in and recognized Vargas, advising her not to call emergency services until Vargas left. Before departing, Vargas told her that McNeil had been abusing him since he was 11. Vargas then observed McNeil take his last breath and laughed. He drove to his parents' house and confided in them about the abuse. They learned that McNeil had been their neighbor for years and that Vargas had been close friends with McNeil's son, Ake. The first instance of abuse reportedly occurred during a camping trip when Vargas was only 11, marking a tragic and long history of suffering and betrayal. Varga revealed that the abuse extended into his adult years, explaining that even when he left town, McNeil would find and stalk him. He recounted how McNeil would sometimes offer him odd jobs, like delivering furniture, only to drug him, provide alcohol, and engage in sexual acts, often when Varga was unconscious. Recently, McNeil's relentless harassment worsened. He called Varga up to 30 times daily and would arrive unannounced at his home with diapers, offering to babysit. Varga claimed that their visit to McNeil's house was not intended to result in violence, but was driven by a desperate desire to end his suffering. Following a murder, Varga was arrested hours later. The incident gained media attention, revealing that about a dozen men, aged in their 30s and 40s, had come forward, accusing McNeil of abuse and stalking. Among them was McNeil's stepson, whose mother, after leaving McNeil, attempted to report the abuse to authorities, only to find the statute of limitations had expired. Several other victims had also tried to come forward over the years, but legal constraints prevented police from acting, whether due to the victim's untraceability or the limitations period. Many questioned how McNeil held such control over Varga well into adulthood. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Wellner explained that vulnerability combined with formative trauma can embed itself deep within a person's psyche. This influence, he said, might be coded in their DNA, explaining why some individuals remain powerless to break free from destructive cycles even as adults. Support for Varga grew within Fort Bragg. There was a petition for leniency and countless fundraisers, including spaghetti dinners, aimed at raising money for his defense. At one of the events, a surprising attendee was McNeil's third wife, who had witnessed her husband's death. She also wrote a letter to the prosecution, expressing her belief that childhood sexual abuse had triggered Varga's violent actions, stating, "I do believe that something having to do with Aaron's childhood sexual abuse caused him to snap and do what he did." In March 2010, Aaron Vargas pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. Prosecutors pushed for a severe sentence. A probation officer recommended 21 years, the maximum allowable, citing suspicions that Varga and McNeil's relationship had been consensual as adults in an attempt to conceal earlier abuse. However, a psychiatrist testified clearly that Varga had been subjected to prolonged abuse. The judge, acknowledging the seriousness of the case, stated he could not be lenient, emphasizing that the murder was intended to cause pain and that probation would endorse such actions. He also said that allowing Varga just probation would be unjust, as it would validate his crime. Recognizing the need for accountability, the court sentenced Varga to 9 years in prison. It remains uncertain what transpired with Varga after sentencing. He may have been eligible for parole after serving about 4 years. Had he served his full sentence, including time already served before pleading guilty, he would have been released by early 2018. In June of 2012, 68-year-old Dennis Pegg was living alone in the quiet town of Stillwater, New Jersey, a close-knit community with roughly 4,000 residents. A veteran with nearly 3 decades of service in Vietnam, Pegg had spent his career as a correctional officer, followed by 7 years as a park ranger. He was also deeply involved in his community as a Boy Scout leader from 1973 to 1980, and served as president of both the Stillwater Township Historical Society and the Sussex County Historical Society. An avid bird watcher, he founded the Sussex County Bird Club and was known for helping hikers along the local trails by offering water and food, embodying the qualities of a kind neighbor. Pegg had never married or fathered children, and his neighbors paid him to mow their lawns. On the evening of June 12th, Pegg was alone at home, watching ESPN. The next day, a town councilor contacted the sheriff's office to request a welfare check. When officers arrived, they discovered blood at the doorway. Upon entering, they found Pegg's lifeless body sprawled across his living room floor, badly stabbed 30 times in the chest, with his throat slashed. The scene indicated a brutal murder. That very afternoon, police arrested a suspect. The call for help originated from a woman concerned about her son, Clark Fredericks, aged 46. She reported that Fredericks had returned home around 2 in the morning, visibly covered in blood, although not his own, and with cuts on his hands. He refused hospital treatment, instead taking sleeping pills and going to bed. Fredericks later explained that Pegg was a family friend who had visited often. He stated that Pegg had sexually abused him during his childhood, starting at age 8 and continuing until 12. According to Fredericks, Pegg had also assaulted other boys, one of whom, known only as Jeff, had eventually taken his own life in 1983. Fredericks recounted that Pegg used intimidation to conceal the abuse, warning him not to talk, even telling him to keep quiet when in front of others. He claimed he kept this painful secret until June of that year, when everything changed. That night, Frederick and his friend, 46-year-old Robert Reynolds, were drinking and doing cocaine when Frederick began speaking about past abuses. Driven by these confessions, they decided to confront Pegg Reynolds at his home. The front door was unlocked, allowing them to enter effortlessly. Frederick recounted that he had stabbed Pegg repeatedly, while also taunting him with disturbing questions about his alleged sexual abuse of boys. After the attack, Frederick slashed Pegg's throat. From the front entrance, Reynolds watched the brutal scene unfold. Later that same day, police arrested Robert Reynolds. Both men faced charges of first-degree murder. As the case gained media attention, additional men stepped forward, sharing similar stories of sexual abuse by Pegg Reynolds. Authorities admitted that Pegg had been accused of such misconduct decades earlier, but he was never prosecuted because victims recanted during initial investigations in the early 1980s. Despite 2 years of investigation, the police couldn't gather enough evidence to charge him. After Peg's death, authorities found child pornography on his computer, along with reports that Peg possessed a box of Polaroid photographs depicting boys he had abused. The police discovered a collection of photographs, which they now considered pornographic rather than innocent keepsakes. Frederick was assessed by psychiatrists from both the defense and prosecution, who agreed that Peg had sexually abused him. He spent nearly 3 years in jail awaiting trial. Ultimately, Frederick agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter in a state of passion or provocation. His sentence ranged from 5 to 10 years. During his sentencing in December 2015, Frederick openly admitted to mishandling the situation and warned others against following his example, emphasizing the importance of speaking out about abuse. The district attorney issued a statement on behalf of Peg's family, acknowledging some wrongdoing on his part and asserting that Peg was never given the chance to defend himself against the accusations. They characterized Frederick as a self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner who ended Peg's life with unlawful violence. Ironically, Frederick's family pointed out that he sought justice only after the killing, implying the act was impulsive rather than righteous. The judge sentenced Frederick to the minimum term of 5 years and declared that he would serve about 3.5 years before becoming parole eligible. In August of 2016, Reynolds pleaded guilty to third-degree robbery and hindering apprehension and received a 4-year prison sentence. He served a few additional months before being granted parole. Frederick was released in January of 2017 after serving approximately 4.5 years. Following his release, he became a motivational speaker. Thank you very much for watching. We also wish to thank Drift for sponsoring this video. Please check them out through the link below. That's all for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the music. Your appreciation means a great deal.